Our story begins over 3,000 years ago, somewhere in the Middle East, where a little boy was peacefully herding his father's sheep, unaware of the fact that just in a couple of months he would face a literal giant in man-to-man combat, a duel which would not only determine the fate of his people, but that of humanity as a whole. So get ready, because in this video we're not only going to learn about the story of a king who had to rely on a little boy to fight his battles, but we're also going to answer the question of whether the antagonist could have been an actual giant. The king of the Israelites, a man named Saul, received an order from God to destroy the enemies of his people, the Amalekites. But the order wasn't just to invade their country, he was to devote to destruction all that they had. Meaning, he was to slaughter not only their men, but their women, their children, their babies, and even their animals. And so, Saul went into battle, slaughtering through the ranks of the Amalekites, defeating them and taking their king hostage. However, against the will of God, he slaughtered only the weak and worthless animals, taking the more valuable ones as livestock for himself. When God saw this, he regretted making Saul king, and so he ordered his prophet, Samuel, to pay Saul a visit and renounce his right to be king of Israel. Saul begged Samuel to pray with him, to ask God for forgiveness, to which he eventually gave in. After that, however, Samuel asked for Agag, the king of the Amalekites, to be brought to him. Agag nervously exclaimed, "Surely the bitterness of death is past." Samuel, however, responded, "As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women." And so he drew his sword and hacked the king of the Amalekites into pieces. The battle was won. However, the people of Israel were far from finally finding their peace. You see, one thing hadn't changed. Saul wasn't in the favor of God anymore, and this meant Israel needed a new king. And so, God sent Samuel to the city of Bethlehem to find and anoint Saul's successor. It was to meet Jesse, who had 8 sons. Jesse introduced Samuel to his first son, and when Samuel saw him, he was sure this handsome, tall young man was to be the new king of Israel. God, however, told him, "Do not look at his appearance, nor at his height, because he is not the one. Humans look at what is in front of their eyes. I, however, look at the heart." And so, one after another, Jesse brought his sons before Samuel. He mustered all 7 of them, but not one of them was destined to be the new king of Israel. All hope seemed lost. Samuel had to tell Jesse, "The Lord has chosen neither of them. Are those all of your sons?" To which Jesse replied, "No, I have one more, the youngest. He is still outside, herding the sheep." And so, finally, he brought in his youngest son. But when Samuel saw the young boy, he didn't look like an imposing king or a fearsome warrior at all. The boy he was looking at was handsome, with beautiful eyes and ruddy skin. Okay, here we need to have a quick pause because I want to point something out. Since we are talking about Arabic people here, whose skin is generally darker, I think the fact that they point out that he is ruddy implies that our protagonist had rather light skin. So the hero in the story of the greatest duel in the history of mankind is a young, pretty, and pale little boy. But God had spoken. He was the chosen one. And so Samuel anointed him as future king of Israel. And from that day on, God was with him. And if you haven't guessed so by now, the boy's name was David. And this is the story of David and Goliath. Parallel to all of this, King Saul was plagued by an evil spirit. Hence, he asked for a man to be brought to him who could play the harp, so that whenever the spirit tormented him, the music of the harp would lighten up his mood. When Jesse heard this, he sent his son, David, to Saul. The two became very close, and David even became his arms-bearer. And from that day on, whenever Saul was tormented by the evil spirit, David played his harp, and Saul became cheerful again. However, what Saul didn't know at the time is that the whole fate of his kingdom would soon depend on that same little shepherd boy. The arch-enemies of the Israelites, the Philistines, went out for battle. They set up their camp on a hill, overseeing the valley of Elah. King Saul and his army took off to confront them, setting up their own camp on the opposite hill, the valley lying between them. Suddenly, from the ranks of the Philistines, a single soldier stepped out. However, this wasn't no ordinary man. It was a giant whose name would go down in the history books as Goliath of Gath. And this is where it gets really interesting, because from here on we have two different versions of the story. Some sources claim Goliath's height was 4 cubits and a span, which would translate to something between 6'9" and 7'6", depending on if you assume big or small cubits. However, other sources say Goliath was in fact 6 cubits and a span tall. This would mean that his height reached from 9'3" to 11'1". And so we need to answer one question. Could Goliath of Gath have been an actual giant? Throughout history, there have again and again been claims of supposed findings of giants. For example, Joe Taylor, the director of the Mont Blanc Fossil Museum, who had claimed to have found this giant bone, which supposedly belonged to the thigh of a giant. Then there were also the alleged giant skeletons of Lovelock Cave and many more such myths. Whether you consider these reports truthful or not is your own decision. I personally prefer to work with some more broadly validated sources in my videos, and so I don't want to rely on them for this one. What I find far more interesting, however, is the fact that in the northern region of the Jordan River, so roughly in present-day Syria, there are hundreds of megalithic tombs, so-called dolmen. But now it gets really weird, because this is the exact area which was known in the Old Testament as Bashan, also called Land of the Giants. The only other place where there was such a huge concentration of these megalithic tombs was in the hills of Judea near Hebron, where, according to Numbers 13:33, the sons of Anak lived, which, back then, were known to be a tribe of giants. However, this is not even all of it. Only a couple hours from Hebron, in a city called Kafar Monash, a bunch of spearheads, copper plates and other relics were discovered. What is so special about this, you ask? A lot of these spearheads were abnormally large, so large in fact that no normal human could have wielded them, the largest spearheads reaching up to 26 inches in length. And the amount of copper plates found in one place was way too big to belong to a regular male coat. Could these have been the weapons and armor of Goliath and his brothers? Speaking of weaponry, let's look at what David would soon have to face if he were to challenge this beast. It is said that only the head of Goliath's spear weighed 600 shekels. If we now do the math and assume that 1 shekel roughly equals 11.5 grams, this would mean that his spearhead alone weighed over 15 pounds. For reference, normally a whole spear, so including the shaft, weighed between 4 and 7 pounds. The giant had a chest plate, which is said to have weighed 5,000 shekels. This would translate to over 125 pounds. Just so you understand how insane this is, a complete set of armor in the Middle Ages weighed between 44 and 66 pounds. Now, whether you want to believe these biblical descriptions or not is your choice. However, if you deem the possibility of Goliath of Gath being a real giant impossible, and stick to the common perspective of how tall humans could get at the time, you then have to consider that grown men were said to be only between 4'9" and 5'4" tall. But David wasn't a grown man, he was just a youth. So one thing was for sure, David was up against a literal monster. And with that in mind, let's get back to our story. Goliath had just stepped out of the lines of the Philistines, and now he began taunting Saul and the armies of Israel. Choose your fighter, and if you can beat me, we will be your servants. Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Send me one of your men so we can fight. Saul and his army were furious at his insults, but too scared to do anything about it. And for the next 40 days, Goliath would come out of his camp every morning and every evening to taunt the ranks of the Israelites. All hope was lost. The battle seemed over before it even started. During all of this, David was at home, caring for the sheep of his father, because he was already old. Instead of him, his 3 oldest brothers went to war together with Saul and the rest of his army. But Jesse, David's father, got worried about his 3 sons. And so he sent David to the front to bring them supplies and to check on their well-being. Just when David came to their camp, the armies went out to the battlefield to set up their ranks right in front of the Philistines. Now both armies stood right in front of each other, shouting their war cries. David rushed to the front line to see if his brothers were there, but just when he found them, Goliath of Gath stepped forward again. The Israeli soldiers were terrified, and just the sight of the giant was enough to make them run away in fear. Again, Goliath began taunting the armies of Israel. The soldiers were talking to each other. Did you see this man who stepped out to defy the ranks of Israel? The king promised to make whoever kills him unbelievably rich, free his family from all taxes, and even gift him his own daughter as a wife. David, who didn't hear them, asked, what will the one who kills that man receive? Because who is he that he has the audacity to defy the armies of the living God? And so the soldiers told him about the reward the king had promised, and as soon as they heard his answer, they brought him to Saul. Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine, David exclaimed. It is impossible for you to fight that man, Saul replied. You're just a little boy. He has been a man of war since his youth. But David countered, I have been herding the sheep of my father. Whenever a lion or a bear came and snatched one of them away, I tracked him down and saved the sheep from his hunger. Your servant has killed the lion and the bear, and this Philistine shall be like one of them, because he tried to defy the armies of the living God. Lastly, he added, the Lord who shielded me against the lions and the bears will also protect me against this Philistine. Finally, Saul gave in. He brought David to the camp to give him his armor, but when David tried to walk in it, he couldn't move because the armor was too heavy, and so he had to take it off again. Instead, he took a staff and went to the nearest brook and carefully chose 5 stones, which he placed in a shepherd's pouch. And there was one more thing that he brought with him, his sling. You see, when we hear sling or slingshot, we usually think of something like this, but there are also these things. And while the first ones can already hurt you pretty bad, these things are deadly. But see for yourself. And now it was time, the stage was set. Our 2 opponents were seeing eye to eye. Slowly but confidently, David began walking towards the giant, who was amused by the sight. Out of all the warriors the Israelites could have mustered, they chose this little boy. Goliath began to mock him. Am I your dog that you come to me with sticks? And he cursed David by his gods. He told him, come here so that I can give your flesh to the birds. But David replied fearlessly, you stand in front of me with sword and spear. I stand in front of you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. On this day, the Lord will surrender you into my hands, and I will cut off your head and feed the animals with the bodies of your people, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." And as the Philistine came closer and closer, David began running towards him, grabbing a stone from his pouch, loading his sling, and then he fired a single stone right into his forehead. The stone penetrated the Philistine's skull, who fell flat on his face. Victoriously, David walked up to the dead giant, stood on top of him, and cut off his head with his own sword. The Philistines couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Their most fearsome warrior was just defeated by some young boy. They took off running, the armies of Israel chasing after them. Now, you might think, sure, this is a nice story, but why would you go as far and call it the most legendary battle of all time? Let me tell you. For once, the term David and Goliath became a literal synonym for every underdog situation in which a smaller, weaker opponent faces a much bigger and stronger one. But it's not just that. You see, had David lost to Goliath that day, history as we know it would have been completely different. Because had Goliath defeated David, the troops of Israel would have been left demoralized, the Philistines could have conquered their country and destroyed their religion, meaning we would have neither Judaism, nor Christianity, nor the Islam. And just think about the effect those three religions had on the world. And all of this was decided by a single duel between a little shepherd boy with a sling and a literal giant of war. Usually this is the moment where I recommend one of my other videos to you, but since this is my very first video, I'm just gonna say that I hope you enjoyed the story and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel, because there are for sure more stories like this to come. So make sure to activate the notification bell so that you don't miss when I upload the next one. See you there and God bless you.